Okay, so have you ever heard that Mark Twain quote about India?
I can't say that I have.
He called India, let me see if I can get it right. He called it the cradle of the human race. The cradle of the human race, a
Mm.
place with, and I quote, the most valuable materials in the history of man.
Wow.
A bit much.
Just a tad grandiose, maybe?
Maybe a bit, but it gets you thinking, right? What would I don't know, like a world-class economist make of India's place in the world today, especially with all this talk of, well, a global slowdown?
Well, that's a really interesting question. And it's actually what we're diving into today.
Exactly. We're going to be tapping into the insights of Raghuram Rajan.
Oh, I like him.
Right. And he's got quite the resume. He was the 23rd governor of the Reserve Bank of India.
That's a big deal.
Huge. And he's also professor at Chicago Booth, so he's got that academic side too.
The best of both worlds.
Totally. But here's the thing. This is the guy who, get this, he predicted the 2008 financial crisis. Yeah. When everyone else was still, celebrating the good times, he was waving a red flag. So we're thinking he might have some pretty interesting perspectives, some eye-opening takes on where the global economy is headed next. And, even more specifically, like, what's India's role in all of this?
Because he's seen it all from the inside. He understands global finance, but he also has a deep understanding of India's economic engine.
Exactly. So let's start with the global economic picture.
Right.
Rajan makes this point, and it's a good one.
Yep.
He says the usual suspect for this slowdown we keep hearing about, the one everyone blames on the world trying to recover from the 2008 crisis.
Right.
He says that explanation is getting a little,
Stale.
yeah, like we're all tired of hearing it.
Right. It's like trying to squeeze more juice out of a lemon that's already bone dry.
Yeah.
I mean, sure, deleveraging was a factor, but it can't be the whole story after all these years.
It's been over a decade, for crying out loud. He brings up Japan.
Okay.
They've been dealing with, really slow growth for decades.
Yeah, the dreaded stagnation.
And Rajan says, and I love this, he says, maybe, just maybe, we're using the wrong tools to measure growth, especially in countries that have aging populations.
That's interesting. So, if your workforce is shrinking, should a stagnant GDP still be, the main indicator of a recession?
Right. Maybe we need to rethink what growth even means in that context,
No.
Adjust the economic barometers a bit.
I like that, the economic barometers.
And this actually connects to another thing that Rajan talks about, another kind of head-scratcher, productivity. We are surrounded by technology. Things are moving so fast,
Warp speed.
But then you look at the productivity numbers and,
Not so warp speed.
yeah, they're pretty dismal.
That's the productivity paradox. It's a real puzzle.
And get this. He has not one, not two, but three possible explanations for it.
Okay, I'm listening. Hit me with them.
First up is something he calls the quality conundrum.
The quality conundrum. Okay.
He says, we're not really factoring in how much better stuff is today compared to, decades ago.
It's true. Take cars, for example. I mean, cars today are basically computers on wheels compared to what they used to be. Our current ways of measuring, they don't really capture those improvements.
Right. It's like we're underestimating the real GDP growth because our tools are stuck in the past.
Our economic measuring sticks are outdated.
Exactly. Okay, then there's what Rajan calls the unseen economy.
The unseen economy.
Okay. So, technology is making a ton of stuff free or, ridiculously cheap.
Think of it, entertainment. Movies, music. We used to pay a lot for all of that. Now it's all streaming services.
And it's way cheaper. Or even free, if you know what I mean.
Exactly. Our lives are objectively better in a lot of ways, but that's not always reflected in, how we traditionally think about economic growth.
It's like our economics haven't quite caught up with reality.
They haven't caught up with how we live now.
Okay. And his third explanation for the whole productivity puzzle.
Let me guess. It's a good one.
It is. So, for ages, we've been told that low interest rates are good for the economy, right?
It stimulates growth. Everyone borrows more, spends more. That's the idea anyway.
Right. But Rajan, he says, hold on a second. Because those low rates might actually be giving an unfair advantage to, the big companies, the ones that are already established. And it kind of screws over the startups, the innovators.
Because they have easier access to all that cheap credit.
Exactly. Right. So instead of getting those big leaps in productivity from new ideas and new businesses, we're stuck with the same old, same old.
It's like we're stifling innovation by accident.
So the question then becomes, how do you fix it? And the obvious answer is, well, more stimulus, right?
Pump more money into the system. That's usually the go-to solution.
Right, that's the playbook. But here's where Rajan throws a curveball. He's not a fan of just throwing more stimulus at the problem blindly.
Interesting. So what does he suggest?
He actually compares stimulus to building a bridge.
A bridge. Okay, I'm intrigued. Explain.
So think of the economy as this like valley. And right now it's in a bit of a dip, right?
Right.
Stimulus, he says, is like building a bridge over that dip. It's helpful in the short term, but it doesn't actually fix the underlying problem.
Because what if the valley is way wider than you initially thought? Or deeper? Your bridge isn't going to do much good then.
Exactly. And his concern is that at a certain point, more stimulus just creates more anxiety, especially with so many countries already drowning in debt.
Right, it's like adding more weight to something that's already about to buckle.
And he's really critical of those like generic spend more approaches. He's not against stimulus itself, but he wants to see targeted investments. He wants a clear path to real results, not just a vague promise of growth.
So it's about moving from helicopter money to laser-focused investment. Instead of hoping for a broad impact, he wants to see strategic spending on projects with clear benefits.
He wants to see returns, tangible outcomes, not just numbers on a spreadsheet. And that leads us to, well, to India.
The heart of the matter.
Exactly. What's interesting is that Rajan is cautiously optimistic about India's economic potential, which I think is a really good place to be.
Cautious optimism, always a good strategy.
He emphasizes that India is definitely on the road to recovery, but it's going to be a slow and steady process.
The tortoise, not the hare.
Exactly. But I can see how maintaining that patience can be a real challenge when you've got, economic data that's all over the map.
Because some indicators are looking good and some aren't.
Yeah, some are not so hot. Like some recent industrial production numbers have been a bit disappointing.
Yeah, I saw those. Not great.
But then you look at things like auto sales
Yeah.
and cement production, those are actually looking really good.
Because those are signs of consumer confidence. People are buying cars and building houses. It suggests that they're feeling good about the future.
Right. So it's a mixed bag, right. But we can't talk about India's economy without addressing the elephant in the room, and that's the banking sector.
Ah, yes. The issue of non-performing loans has been a persistent thorn in India's side. Those loans that are not being repaid as they should be can really clog up the system.
It's been a major headache. And Rajan, to his credit, he doesn't shy away from that. But here's the interesting thing. He sees the cleanup process, as painful as it might be, as absolutely crucial for long-term economic health.
It's like ripping off a bandage.
Yeah.
It's going to sting for a bit, but ultimately it's the best thing for the wound to heal properly.
Exactly. And he says that this, tough love approach will actually help banks lend more effectively in the long run.
Because you're clearing out the bad debt, making room for healthier lending practices.
It's like hitting the reset